All right, so we're going to start by talking about the grade sheet that you just got. And I like to walk people through it because sometimes it's like overwhelming or whatever. But somehow this is my brain. This is how I think about grades. So I try to make it as easy as possible. That's why there's lots and lots of color coding on it so that you can see. Up at the top when you get it, it'll tell you how many days of class you've missed, how many late days you've been late, and how many times you told me you were going to be gone. The way the formula works, if you tell me, you don't lose quite as much as if you don't tell me and don't show up. So you get penalized for that. In the box with the dotted lines on it, I should point on here. This would be easier. Inside this box right there, that's your current grade. You are the second column, so you're right there. Above you is whatever the class average is. And this is a sample grade sheet, so it doesn't have anything to do with your class. But you're essentially always looking in the lower set of boxes. We move over into the next section, which is right here. That's the assignment section. Okay, it gives you a little bit of a summary of what your various assignments are and how it all adds up in terms of percentages. We come over here to the comment section. Let me clear this off. Right over here in the comment section, your comments are the second number, the lower number. The number that I think you should have is the upper number. If you have more than, it caps at 100, so you can't get more than 100%, but you can slack off later on in the semester and life is good. So I would always recommend erroring on more because as the semester gets busier, you're going to tend to forget more, etc. So if you have more, that's good. You don't lose those more. They'll still count toward the end. That is a total number at the end of the semester that we're looking for. Next big bar is your exercise bar here. Essentially, you want, at the end of the semester, you want that bar to be all green. If it's all green, life is good. If you have something that's turning yellow, and I apologize, the color on the screen is kind of nasty, but it should be obviously clear on your handout. If you have something where you missed one, it'll show up as a 0, probably in yellow. Chances are you forgot just to post it. It's also entirely possible that I make a mistake. Recognize that there's 32 of you, and I go through and I'm checking off, and sometimes I miss one. And so if I miss it, just tell me, and we'll correct it. That's why I give you these sheets. You can audit me. We'll make sure it's all good. The next section down at the bottom is kind of the part that matters more than anything else to you guys. Right here, that big section. This is where it all kind of comes to fruition. You'll have your assignment 101, you'll have your grade for assignment 101, and then you'll have my comments about your assignment 101. Okay? I try really hard to give you guys good constructive comments. Generally, if you have a higher grade, the comments are less helpful than if you have a lower grade. No surprise there. But that's what I have to say about your work. If your work was late, it'll have a little bracket with late minus 10%. If you forgot to do part of it, like if you didn't write the paragraph on this first assignment, you lost some percentage. It'll tell you what the percentage is that you lost. If let's say in that example you didn't write the paragraph, and I forget how much I took off. I think it was 10% for that. You didn't write the paragraph. You can do a resubmit and get that 10% back. If it's a late penalty, it stays no matter what. So even if you do a regrade, that late penalty still applies. That's just the way it works. Yeah?
When we resubmit, can we resubmit a totally different picture
Yep.
for the first one?
It's as if the first one didn't even happen. It's just a fresh shot at it.
So you risk actually getting lower.
That's how it works. So I give you the regrade. It's not guaranteed to go up. It's just as if the first one never happened. Okay? So it's your choice to do it, and plenty of people do. Most of the time, the grades go up because your skills get better as the semester goes on. So generally, they're always going to go up. But if you do a really terrible job on it, theoretically, it could go down. So right now, you guys don't have any more assignments. So you're going to have a bunch of zeros going down here. That's OK. Likewise, the bunch of zeros going off in this direction on your exercise bar, that's totally fine. You don't need to stress out about that. I think I went up through exercise 109 for you guys. Like I said, this is just a sample one. So there's 9 total exercises. Those 9 exercises are the ones that count towards your percentage. So you're not going to have like a 30% in your exercises. It'll just count for those first 9 that you did. As we come down here, obviously you don't have a final grade yet. You'll get your exercises total. It says see exercise bar above if you're missing any. Again, the goal is 100%, pass, not pass. Easy to get those, so there's no reason not to do it. Then we get to comments. And this is where, if I were to predict right now, anybody whose grade is not what they want, there's a good chance that it's tied to this. And this is a little unfair because I give you this first grade sheet back. You've had one assignment, and that one assignment is worth, whatever, 7% of your overall grade. Well, right now, your comments are worth 5% of your overall grade, but they're almost the same amount. At the end of the semester, remember, you've got all this other stuff that adds up, and your comments are still only 5% of your grade. So it's going to skew the other direction as we go forward. So if you're low on comments, right now, this can really drag your grade down. The good news is they're not applied until the end of the semester, so you just do some more comments. That number changes. No big deal. Your participation grade is based on how many days of class you missed, how many times you were late, that sort of thing. The only way to improve this grade is to show up to class, right? You show up to class, your grade gets better. No surprise. Okay? Then we have your total grade in a percentage, and then we have your total grade as a letter grade. I like to tie the letter grade to the percentage too so that you guys can see what it translates to. Generally speaking, 89.5 and up, so including 89.5, will get an A. Between 79.5 and 89.4 will be a B. You get the idea, okay? Hopefully there aren't any grades lower than that. We are not shooting for those grades. So that's kind of how it works. I like to translate to that letter grade. Remember, at DVC, there's no pluses or minuses, so you just get the straight up letter grade, which is awesome if you have like a B minus, because it counts as a B. It's awful if you really had like an 89.4 and you can't even get a B plus because you're dragged down into the B. So it works both ways. But that's the way the grades work at DVC. I don't make that rule. That's how it works. So that's how it's going to be translated for you guys there, so you can see where you currently stand. Okay? Does that kind of make sense? I like to spend a little bit of time talking through it so that it's clear. Remember, the numbers above are always the percentages of the class average. The numbers below are always your numbers when you look at the bars. Okay, so we'll get to typography here in a second, but I do also, before we get too far in here, want to point out that you got two handouts. The first one being your exercise 110 today. We'll go through that in a little bit. But you also got your assignment 103 handout. So this is your next assignment. You got a little bit of time off. You actually got a whole weekend off without an assignment stressing you out, so life is good. But this is coming up. It is due next Wednesday, not this coming Wednesday, but the Wednesday after, the 27th. Okay, so not in 2 days, in a week and 2 days. Make sense? Okay. It is an InDesign poster. A lot of you have been doing posters if you're in 121 already, so this should be like really easy. Okay. Hopefully this one's a little bit more enjoyable to do. You are going to be making a poster for a hypothetical lecture series coming here to DVC. If you want to use last spring's lecture series and use all those speakers, that's fine. If you want to invite speakers that you would like to see, that's fine too. If you want to invite speakers that are no longer living, that's okay too. So anything's fair game. You're making up who you want to have come talk, and it can be anybody, and that's okay. This is not about the content. It's about how you're presenting the content. So how are you getting people to come to the lecture? What is the speaker series? What is the hierarchy of text in the poster? Do you have something that grabs somebody at 12 feet, 6 feet, 2 feet, 3, as we get in closer? And we'll talk about that kind of layout. So this is about the layout. This is about the graphic design, not about who's coming to speak. Okay? But if you don't want to come up with your own, you can, of course, use last semester's lecture series. See if I'm getting anything else here. I do want you to give me an 11 by 17 print, just like you've been doing. The only difference is this is 11 by 17, not 8.5 by 11, so it's a little bit bigger. And you'll print to, I probably will make references to the 5550. That one's apparently not working, so you have to use the 9500 over there instead. So you have to change printers. But there is a color 11 by 17 over there that you can print to. Yeah?
Just a quick question. How many months out of the year would you like us to cover in the poster? The full 12 months? Or would you like us to
No, it could just be the semester. Just pick dates from here to the end of the semester. That's enough. But like I said, it's not about the content so much. So if you did more than that, it's no big deal. Okay? So it's due on the 27th. You're going to hand me that 11 by 17 print, and we will go from there. Are there any questions about this? No? OK. I wanted to spend a little bit of time to at least introduce that. Those of you that walked in late, I will give you your grade sheets in a little bit. OK. So today we're going to talk about typography. And I spend a whole lecture talking about this because I think it's absolutely essential and critical for graphic design and ultimately for any design. As soon as you're presenting your ideas, what font you choose really starts to matter. Anybody turn in something in 121 and have Daniel just like tear it up and say, nope, no good, the font choice was terrible, right? Okay, it happens. It happens. And the truth is, it's a reflection on you and your choices. And that's why we need to talk about fonts and types, etc. Before I get into this, I want to tell one little side story. Anybody ever watch Steve Jobs' commencement speech at Stanford? A few, maybe? OK. If you haven't, waste the 15 minutes and watch it, because it gives quite a bit of insight into him and kind of his thought process. He attributes almost all of his idea generation and getting into starting Apple Computer and everything else to fonts. Like it's kind of crazy. Okay? He took a class in college that was about typography, that was about typefaces and designing typefaces, and he got so obsessed with this that he said somebody has to make a better computer that can do this, that can have different typefaces. And that really started the whole Apple Computer thing. And look at where they are now. Pretty crazy. So it's important to at least do that. That's not actual homework, but I would waste the 15 minutes. It's a great speech. Okay? So, style in typefaces. You guys are familiar with this because you've done this before. We have 3 styles. We have the regular typeface, we have an italicized version of it, and we have a bold version of it. And chances are you've used all 3 of those at some point in your design career. They're usually used to provide some kind of contrast or emphasis to a particular piece of the design. You want to bring some attention to something, you make it bold. No surprise. If you can, however, you should be choosing this from within the typeface family, not from within the operating system. Okay, so you're writing along in your Word document, and the default is, oh, let me go up and select bold, or let me select italics. Unfortunately, that isn't the best solution. Okay, so if I did that, if I went into Word and I said, make this font italicized, in our operating system, it's going to take the regular font and it's going to slant it over a little bit. Okay, it's italicized. It provides a little emphasis. But if we choose instead from the font family, instead of the operating system, we get this. Significantly different. And we're relying on the typeface designer, the person who did the design work of this particular font, to give us an italicized version that's easier to read, that's been carefully thought out. And generally, this result is a lot better. Oh, wait, sorry. I had a couple other slides here.
Where do you find the font then?
It's usually listed under your fonts. So you'll be in a specific font, Helvetica New, and then it'll be Helvetica New Bold, Helvetica New Bold Italic, etc. And we'll get into that in a little bit. Then we get to weight. Weight is essentially the relative darkness or lightness of the letter formed, generally marked by thicknesses of the lines. So down here under weights, we have light, we have medium or regular, and we have bold. Notice the light is thinner, the medium is a little bit thicker, the bold is obviously thicker still. So we have weight. So we have style, then we have weight. Here we go, all the way from thin, extra light, light, regular, medium, semi-bold, bold, black, super. So a really good font family is going to have all of these available to us. And so you could, in a design, pick one font and work within the font family and get plenty of variety and plenty of hierarchy just in how you use the font itself. Then we get into width. Width is variations in the width of the typeface. So we could have it condensed or compressed, make it smaller and more squished together, or we can have an extended. The extended is the great, like, I need my English paper to be 4 pages, so let me switch to an extended font. Get that extra page, right? Teachers know that, so you don't really get credit, so it doesn't work. I'm going to show you how to cheat that in a little bit, okay? Excite refers to the letters, the height of the lowercase letters without an ascender or a descender, essentially the height of an X. X is the easiest way to measure. There's nothing that goes above or below. And that gives us something called the X height of a particular font. Then we get a cap height, which is the height from that baseline all the way up to the top of a capital letter. And that ratio varies based on font. So the X height and the cap height, depending on what font you choose, can be different. So let's look at it in graphic form here. This is always a little bit easier to see. So if we look at the X height, essentially we're looking at the X. There's our baseline there. And we go up to our X height, which is the top of the X. Our cap height is the same baseline. So we're at the same baseline here. But we're going up this time to the top of the capital letter. Then we have an ascender, which would be right here, the tail of the H, and a descender there, which goes down. That's the tail of the P. Counters are white spaces that are located inside and around letter forms. They affect the legibility, readability, and density of the font or of the typeface. Thin fonts at large sizes have open counters, so they have lots of space around them, and they can be hard to read. The opposite is true for bold fonts. So let's look at an example here. OK, so I have errors written in two really big in a very light typeface. There's lots of space around the letters, and you have to concentrate a little bit. Obviously, you can all read this. OK? But you have to concentrate because there's a lot of white space around a thin letter. The opposite is true if we look at this. You have to kind of squint at it a little bit because it's really dense and it's squished together. So those counters get closed and it's harder to read. So you just have to be aware of this as you start to make your decisions about a particular font. We have something called small capitals, and this is designed to use when we're using abbreviations or we need to use capital letters, but we don't want to provide too much emphasis on those capital letters. And what they are is it's an uppercase set of letters that are the X height. So we take a capital letter and we shrink it down to be the height of the X. So it fits in the flow of the text at the lowercase level instead of being uppercase. And it doesn't result in a large emphasis on your particular text. Then we move into lining and non-lining figures, which is a very similar to capitals and the shorter capitals, the small capitals. Essentially, it's a set of numbers. Figures mean numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that are either the height of a capital letter or they're the height of a lowercase or the X height letter with ascenders and descenders. And if you're going to work these into a paragraph of writing, it can make a big difference. So here we go in this example. We have on the left side up here, we have our lining numerals, which essentially are from X height to cap height on all the letters. And if we look at the paragraph here, we move along. The cover price of the paperback edition is $15. So look right there at that little $15. It stands out because it's tall in the context of the overall piece. Likewise, we come down here a little bit further, and we can see that number there. It stands out. All the numbers stand out. If we jump over to non-lining numerals, notice here this is the X height. And in the case of like a 3, we've got a descender. In the case of a 6, we've got an ascender that sticks up. So in that example, and we look at the same things, the $15 works and reads just like a regular line of text. It's not unwanted emphasis on that price. Likewise, we come down here to the distance, the 1,476 minutes. It reads in and doesn't stand out. So if you're going to be using numbers in a block of text in a paragraph, you want to use these non-lining figures so that it reads with the paragraph rather than standing out against the paragraph. Ligatures are a specially designed set of characters when you combine 2 or 3 characters together. So this is really easy if you think about handwriting things. Okay, my son's first name is Bennett. Okay, so I write Bennett, and it ends in 2 T's. What naturally would I do if I was doing 2 T's? I'd draw the 2 T's, and I'd cross them both together, right? That's natural. In a computer, we type 2 T's next to each other. They're 2 separate T's. Unless we have something called a ligature. And a ligature says, wait a minute, those two T's belong together, so let's cross them together. So the font designer can set these up in advance. When you have those characters coming together, they're replaced with a special character. So here we go. Ligatures are off on the left. Ligatures are on the right. F and I, the top of the F becomes the dot on the I. You guys see that? If we have F, F, and I, we cross the two F's together, just like I was talking about with the two T's crossing together. F, F, L, the L joins into the top of the F. So these are all done on purpose by the typeface designer. The person who designs the fonts thinks about how these should come together. Notice also that the first F is a little bit shorter than the second F. So all of that is carefully considered. We get into discretionary ligatures. These are not the standard ones. These are sometimes people end up, or typeface designers end up doing it. So the S and T, for example, where the top of the S turns into the T, I haven't really seen this in practice, nor would I choose to do it. I don't see anything wrong with just the standard S and T, but it can be done. The G and the I, again, not that common. Some typeface designers may choose to do it along the way. So then we get into choosing the right font. And here comes the ArcGIS 121. Oh, you chose the wrong font, rip, toss, etc. So we need to figure out how to choose that right font. So first off, you want to think about what is the longevity of the piece. How long is this supposed to last? Is it going to be trendy right now? Is it going to go out of style long term? What's appropriate for this particular piece? What's the purpose of it? What are we trying to do? If we're trying to do a poster on modernism, picking a serif font isn't the right choice, which is most likely what caused you to get flagged by Daniel. Okay? Because it's not a modern font. Is it innovative or is it outdated? Fonts go in and go out. You know, right now the trend is everything needs to be gray. You want to paint the inside of your house gray. Gray is in, right? Well, like 10 years ago, tan was in, and now it's gray. Same thing happens in fonts, right? Something goes in, something goes out. And you want to think about how do you combat that long term? And that then goes back to the longevity of the piece. How long is this going to be around? Is it going to seem really dated or not? Is it traditional or is it too conservative? Enter Avatar, 2009, right? This font is called Papyrus. It got really popular in 2009. Everybody used Papyrus. And now you look at Papyrus and you're like, oh, because it's so 2009. Right? It went everywhere. Like everybody was using Papyrus. It's like the in thing. Okay? So you want to think about this because then it's the in thing. Are you being trendy or are you not being trendy? Okay? If you use Papyrus on your architecture lecture series poster, I will fail you. No, I'm kidding. But I probably will anyway. Compare side by side for readability, emotion evoked, legibility. We'll talk about the difference between readability and legibility in a second. Does it reflect the needs of the client and the viewer? We talked a lot last time about client versus viewer, who it's intended the audience would be. Does the font choice reflect that? So here's two different examples. Sometimes you just have to try examples. You have to try different fonts and see what fits. Okay? Two different examples in two different fonts. They're close, but they're a little bit different. And my guess is that you guys would have a preference of one over the other. How many people like the left? Okay? A few of you, how many people like the right? Okay? And you could probably argue why you think one is better than the other. But the point is they're different. And so you as the designer have to think about that, even though they're similar. I like this just because it's kind of fun. Right? This is the most science we're going to get in this class. It's the periodic table of typefaces. And we go all the way from Helvetica up in the upper corner down into the New England fonts at the end with some of the cursive script fonts. Here's another one that's pretty fun. So you need a typeface. And I'm really struggling to do this. And I don't know what typeface. We start here, right there. And then we move along this little chain. OK, I'm going to do a book. OK, so there I am at book. Are you completely in doubt? No or yes? Well, again, this is kind of for fun anyway, right? Am I completely in doubt? No. Let's keep going. A champion usability, perhaps? No, I'm not. Okay. Everybody loves Garamond. No, I don't like Garamond. OK, we'll go here. Oh, let me come on here. Oh, you want a sans serif? Is that the case? Yes, I do. Oh, wait. Oh, there we go. I'm over here, Optima. That happens to be the font that I chose for the book in the class. I had to do it that way. I didn't create this. That actually is a choice. Did I go through this before I chose that font for the book? No. But it's kind of fun nonetheless. So the point is, you could go and do the same thing. I want a logo, and you work your way through, and you might get to a font that is acceptable. Oops, sorry. Serif and sans serif. You heard me mention this a couple times in lecture already. Let's clear up any unknowns here. A serif font is fundamentally a font that has tails on it. So we look right here. It has these little tails that come out. What these tails do for you is they make it really easy to read. Our brains recognize these letter forms really well. If we're reading, let's say you pick up a paperback book. I know people don't actually read books anymore, but let's pretend for the moment that you actually read a physical book. Okay? You pick that book up and you open it. Chances are, 90+% of the time, it's going to be a serif font because it's easier to read. You can read it faster and it's easier. Sans serif, on the other hand, is really clean. It doesn't have the tails. It doesn't have the little extra swoops on it. And because of it, looks really graphically striking. A lot of blogs and websites use sans serif fonts as part of them. You'll notice, however, that those websites all make the fonts a little bit bigger. And by making them a little bit bigger, they're easier to read. So you go onto a blog, they're using a sans serif font, chances are it's a little bit bigger. So if we're printing a book, you pick a serif font, you can make the font smaller, it's still easy to read. You can put more book into fewer pages, it costs less to produce the book, costs less to buy the book. Okay, so does that make sense? So there's a fundamental difference between these two, and you're going to use that to your advantage as you go forward. Did I skip a slide? No. OK. Combining typefaces. Like I said before, if we picked a single font family, as long as it was a robust family, it had bold, it had semi-bold, it had thin, you could work within that single font family and get plenty of diversity. However, you could also jump outside and pair two fonts together. And generally, if you're going to pair two fonts together, you want to combine a serif and a sans serif. It doesn't make sense to combine two sans serifs because they're too close together, or combine two serifs because they're too close together. So you work with a sans serif and a serif that have similar x heights and similar cap heights, so the ratios are the same. That's important. And really, the truth is, the easiest way of doing this is Google font combinations or font pair. And chances are you can find a font pair that's a good pair to go together. They should have the similar x heights, as I said, and there's a bunch of examples that are out there that you can pick from, depending on what's available on your computer. So here's a couple examples here where we have different fonts that go together. They have similar x heights in all cases and similar cap heights. So if I was looking at any one of these, there's my baseline. Notice that the x height is exactly the same all the way across. That's important. But if I were to take this one and bring it down here, the x height there to there is bigger than that one. So we just need to make sure that the x heights match as we look at combining those together. We can obviously also use display fonts or script fonts. You're doing a wedding invitation. You get a wedding invitation in the mail. Maybe it was hand calligraphy with all the extra little swirls and all that stuff. And you look at it and you're like, I don't know how they had got it to the right place because I can't read what my address is or what my name is. Okay? Because they do all that fancy extra stuff. You can get fonts that do that same kinds of things. You can get display fonts that pop things out. But if you use those display fonts in the context of trying to write your English paper, your English teacher is going to be like, no, I'm not accepting this. Okay? Because obviously we need to be able to read it. So when we get into designing with type, we want to think about two different things. One is legibility, and the other is readability. And they're two different things. They sound the same, but they're different. They're both essential for successful communication of an idea. So first off, legibility is the recognition of individual letter forms and their relative position to other letters. So it's letter-to-letter recognition. Readability is how the typography is presented as words, lines, and paragraphs. So readability is about paragraphs and can I actually read through this document? Legibility is, can I see the individual letter forms and understand what the letters mean and how they're combined into a particular word? So here we go. Legibility up top. I'm sorry this is a little blurry. Arial seems easy enough to understand, whereas Mesquite poses a bit of a challenge. Okay, so legibility, letter-to-letter recognition. Easy with Arial, pretty challenging over here. It's hard to see the difference between the letters. So that's legibility. Readability, you want to use a type that's comfortable, not letter Gothic, as it might be harder to read. Okay? This you can read faster than letter Gothic. Serif versus sans serif. Okay? Readability. Content, if you're doing a headline or something, great. Use impact. Use something big for that content. If you try to use that content, the big impact font on content on a paragraph, it's not going to look well. It's not going to look well. It's not going to look very good, and you're going to end up having the words that are too dense together. Context is also important. So you're writing about something financial. You're writing about something in business, for example. Times New Roman, as much as I hate that font, is very appropriate. Okay? If, however, you're writing in my daughter's second grade class or first grade classroom, Comic Sans might be appropriate. But if I took Comic Sans and I wrote my big financial paper about it, do you think anybody would take me seriously? No. All because of the font. I could be the best analyst out there. And if I picked the wrong font, nobody would listen. So it's really important that you think about that in the world of context. Objective representation is a very practical and straightforward way of laying out content and ordering your content, etc. We'll get into this a lot more detail next class. Subjective representation is a little more conceptual and interpretive. It's heavily focused on a theme or an idea. It's how you organize the individual typefaces. We're going to be doing a little bit of both in the exercise today. Then we think about macro perspectives. This is the overall big picture stuff. This is the large scale thing. Overall format of the composition, overall choice of fonts. Is it all going together? Does it have a nice typographic hierarchy? That sort of thing. And then the micro perspective is the small details. The kerning and the tracking, we'll talk about what those are in just a second. The individual spacing of letters. What's the ragging at the end of a particular column of text. Clean presentation, good application. Something like this. It's in German, I think. But it doesn't matter. I can't read it. But type-wise, it's really nicely done. Right? I understand where the heading is and where the description is. Symmetry and asymmetry. Symmetrical is obviously balance and harmony. One side is the same as the other side. Asymmetrical, it's a little bit more chaotic, but it can provide some interest or some focal point. Alignment is the horizontal and vertical position of the type within the margins of the page itself, or the page itself. The alignment creates the visual relationships between images and text, or between text and text, that create all of the elements of the design. Typographic color refers to the density of a typographic element. And by that, I basically mean like a paragraph of text. And its perceived gray value. So if you guys kind of squint at this, and I've deliberately made this small enough so you can't really read the text, there are some paragraphs that stand out as darker than others, correct? Okay? That works as an element of your overall design. If you look at a graphic layout and you're starting to put your pieces in, how dark the text is weighs on the rest of the elements in the layout. Weighs on the other pictures. It can balance or imbalance your particular paragraph. So you want to think about typographic color in this context. Type size is measured in points. You guys are all familiar with this. You've all done this where you say, oh, I need a little bit more in my English paper. Therefore, let's bump that up to maybe a 13 point. Right? Maybe it's the other way. Maybe you guys are so good that you need to shrink your page down, so you go to 10 point. I doubt it. But, it is what it is. Like I said, I'm going to show you the trick later on. Right? See, I knew there was something valuable in this class, right? There's a reason you took it. You want to develop a proportionate scale of sizes and stick to it. So let's say our heading is 14 point. We have a subheading at 12, and our body is 10. right? There's a proportionate set of sizes there. We're using those sizes throughout the document as a whole. Case is also critical. So lowercase letters are much easier to read than uppercase letters because they're legible. You can see the letter-to-letter recognition is easier. Uppercase emphasizes letter-to-letter recognition. So you have to slow down. You have to concentrate on what you're reading, which is a good thing, maybe. Okay? So think about this in the architectural context. What do architects do? We write in all capital letters, right? So we don't write a lot, but we really want you to think about what we wrote. So we write in all capital letters. There's logic to this. Okay, so let's pull up an example. So for example, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word appear. The only important thing is that the first and last letter are in the right place. This is a little hard to read, right? Okay, so let's flip it, though. Try reading it here. It's a whole lot easier to read it here than in all capitals. Okay, so I'll flip back one more time. Right? This is harder because it's letter-to-letter recognition. We have to go through and see every individual letter. Here, we're looking at forms of words, what the first and last letter are in the words, and the approximate number of ascenders and descenders. And our brains are really smart at this kind of stuff. That's how we read fast, right? So we're not looking, when it's lowercase like this, we're not looking at individual letters. We're looking at word forms, and we're recognizing the word forms. So this is much faster to read. Kerning. Adjust the space between individual letters. And so this is, again, kind of like those ligatures when I was talking about the two T's with one cross. It's the same thing here. Let's say I did a T and a Y. Naturally, you put the Y closer into the stem of the T, and the T goes over the top of the Y. Right? That's just natural when you write. Default font, though, the Y goes after the end of the top of the T. The Y goes down there. So by correcting kerning, we can slide that Y under the T and have it feel like it should. And that's something that we manually have to go in. It's used to correct letter collisions and unwanted spaces between the letters. It also allows the text to flow nicely. Now, are you going to go through every letter on a paragraph and do kerning to end of? No, absolutely not. But on a title, sure, absolutely. On a big piece of text, yes, this matters. Okay? So big letters that are important, T-Y, V-A, Y-I, L-L is a good one. Bringing those together. 19 is another example. So we have a little bit of extra space in there. We want to shrink those down. That's kerning, letter-to-letter spacing. Tracking, on the other hand, adjusts the overall spacing between words, lines, and paragraphs. So I told you, and I've alluded to this many times, how you make your English paper a little bit longer. Right here. Right? It's your tracking. It's a little bit of space in between every letter, just a little bit, right? And suddenly your English paper is the right length, right? Unless you're counting words, in which case, no good. Okay? So tracking extends everything out. Little bit of space between the letters, little bit of space between the words, little bit of space between the paragraphs. Suddenly everything gets a little bit longer. Maybe you want to compress it down a little bit. You adjust the tracking the opposite way, a little bit denser text. Everything gets a little bit closer together. So that's what tracking is. Big picture versus kerning, small picture, letter to letter. Leading is essentially what Word likes to call double space or single space or 1.5 space. Okay? Leading is the space between lines of text. And generally this is tied to your, it's tied to your font size in InDesign. So by default, your font size is 14. Your leading is going to be a percentage more than the 14. So it'll be like 16 or something. It's a little bit more. I think it's 1.2 times whatever the font size is. Anyway, doesn't matter. It'll do it for you. That's the default. But if you want more space, you can increase that leading to get more space in between individual lines of your particular paragraph. If you have a tall X height, or you have a sans serif font, remember no tails, you need more leading, you need more space between the lines than you do if it's a shorter, lighter, wider, or serif typeface. So remember, serif is easier to read because of the tails. You can compress it down and fit more in. No surprise, you pick up a magazine, little itty bitty tiny text, it's all serif because it's easier to read. So I had to show you a few examples. These are more portfolio examples. But again, very carefully considered typography, carefully considered font choice, but also size and hierarchy. We look at this image here. We have a small little bit of all capital letters. Then we have a bigger title. That's a bolder set of letters. We have a description. Then we come down here. You can barely see this, but this is a much lighter version of the same font. So they're using all of that skill set to in their portfolio to kind of create this hierarchy of elements. And then we go to the really big bold. There it is again. You can see how that falls through with all of the various documents that are part of their portfolio. Another example here. This one, it doesn't show up well on the projector. Yeah, we'll just skip through this for now. OK, so we're going to switch over from that into InDesign, and I'm going to talk through type specifically with InDesign. While you're waiting for me to switch over, I want you to go on the course website, log in, and download the Word document. There's a Vitruvius Word document file, and you're going to need that for what we're doing today. OK? And then I'll switch over. So finally, I got that recording to work. Apologize for the delay there. So today we're going to talk through text in InDesign, and you're going to do two different things as part of your work today. The first one, we'll start with just a blank new document. So I have InDesign open. I'm going to create a new document. And then in the defaults here, a letter page is fine. Our intent for print, that's fine as well. I'm going to uncheck facing pages because I don't need it to be a book. I'm just doing a single page for right now. I'm going to set my margins to 0. And I'll press Tab, and then because they're chained together, I can get all 4 as 0 at once. And then I'll go ahead and say OK to create my new 8.5 by 11 document. Last time we talked about changing the units into inches from picas. If you want to do that, you'll right-click right where the two rulers meet, and then change your units into inches. There we go. And so we have 8.5 by 11 to work with as part of this particular document. So because we're working on type today, I'm going to go ahead and switch from my advanced workspace. Maybe you were in Essentials. I'm going to choose Typography as my workspace, which will give me all of the type tools different from the other tools that are available to me as well. There are some differences in the type tools, and we'll get to those in just a second. I did ask that all of you go to the course website, go to today's exercise, and download that Word file, which should be somewhere. There we go, Chapter 1. It's a Word document file. Make sure that that's downloaded. Do move this to your flash drive out of your Downloads folder. So I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to put it into my flash drive for today.
Is it important to set up the document exactly how you set it up?
What do you mean?
When you initially set up this document?
No, you can change it later if you need to. And for the scope of what we're doing today, it doesn't really matter the size. If you scroll down, it's this Vitruvius 10 Books on Architecture Word doc file. It's the first one. You want that one. And so I'm going to put it into today's folder, today's 110. By the way, you're 10 days into class. How about that? 10 class days of 32 or so. So you're about a third of the way there. Happens fast. I'm going to create a new folder for today so I can keep it separate from last semester. This is going to be fall of 2017. Oops. And let me go ahead and paste that. The Word document, and I'm specifically using a Word document as much as I dislike Word because this is a relevant way of working it. The Word document is essentially a piece of Vitruvius's 10 Books on Architecture. It's the first chapter. We're not going to use all of this by any means, but we will use a bit of it. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and close that. I don't need the Word document open anymore. I'm going to go back to my InDesign file here. So what we can do in the world of InDesign is I can create text boxes. And so the first thing that I'll do is I'll come over to the T tool here. And I'm going to draw two text boxes. We'll say the first one is maybe there. And the second one we'll make like right here. Maybe like that. They're not even right now, but I'll fix that a little bit later on. Now, I've created those two text boxes, and they exist as just two text boxes. But if I were to select one of the text boxes, I'll select the first one here, I can actually, just like I do with an image, I can place a Word document file into my text box. So I can take that thing that I typed, and I can drop it in here to do the layout on it. So I'll go to File, and then Place, just like I did with a photograph. And then I can go to today's folder, and I can select Chapter 1, and I can say Open. And it's going to drop the text into this first text box that I created. It's going to tell me also that it's missing the font that came with it. And this is something that's very common if you wrote at your home computer and then you brought it in here. The fonts might not match up. So it's going to ask me, do I want to replace this font with something else? It also highlights the font in pink so that you can see that, oh, something's wrong, I need to fix it. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Find Font. And it looks like Times Roman is really called Times New Roman here. It's probably because I created it on a Mac. So we'll call it Times New Roman. And let's change all. There we go. So here's Times Roman. We'll go to Times New Roman, change all. There we go. And as I do that, you see that it's changed the font. It's gotten rid of that highlighting, and I'm now back to Times New Roman as my font choice. So the neat thing about InDesign is the text flows into this box that I created, and if I were to adjust the size of this a little bit, notice that it just adjusts the flow. Furthermore, notice at the bottom of this box, there's a little red plus sign right here. That plus sign will allow me to take this text. It says there's more text than can fit, and I can add it by clicking on it to the text box that's next to it. And so the text flows through here, back up to this column, and continues down this column. It also tells me that there's more text than will fit. And so for the course of today, we don't have to keep going until all the text. You're just going to fill up one page. But I can chain these two together. I can also adjust and say, you know what, I want this to be a little bit shorter, and it'll continue to flow through no matter how I move these. So the text itself is independent of the boxes. So I'm not spacing, I'm not doing anything, not extra returns or extra tabs or anything like that. It's just the size of the boxes is letting me make these adjustments. So we could make this go over a little bit more, maybe like that. Let me pull this back just a bit. Pull this one back just a bit. There we go. Now I have two boxes there. Let's pull this one down. More like that. Now, the other thing that I could have done here is I could have said, you know what, I really want the text to go into a title first. So let me pull these down. Give myself room for a title here. I'll make the title go all the way across here. But my text already kind of flows through, so I might need to make some adjustments. So let me go ahead and replace this. I'll go to File and then Place. Oops, that was the wrong thing. File, Place. Control D is also there. I'll go back to Vitruvius. I'm going to drop it in there. I'll fix these again. There we go. And this time I'm going to chain them back through there. So essentially all I was doing was I was adjusting the order. And now maybe I want these to be a little bit bigger, so now it's time to start working on the fonts themselves. So I already have the font brought in from the Word file, but now I want to start making adjustments to the text itself. So let's create a heading for Chapter 1. So I'll look at Chapter 1 as a font. If I select Chapter 1 as a font, you can see that I have a bunch of options that are available to me up at the top ribbon here as I go across. So let's talk through what those options are. The first option is what the font is. So right now it's set as Times New Roman. If I were to click this little drop-down menu, I could pick a different font. So I can pick Algerian, for example, and it's going to change to that particular font. Picking a font shouldn't be too challenging for you. You know that fonts exist. Okay? So maybe I don't like that. Maybe I want something else. Maybe something like that. I don't know. Okay? So now that I've created that, now I'll move on. And again, it's selected. We talked about within the font family, there may be multiples. So I could make that bold within the font family. There we go. I can move on to size. Right now it's at 16 point. I could go up, maybe 18 point. So maybe chapter 1 is 18 point. Maybe this text here really needs to be 14 point. And the rest of this should be 10 point. Oh, I didn't quite get it all, so let's keep going. Control 0 will let me see everything. Let me select it all. I'm going to come back and make that adjustment. Let's go to 10 point. Let me take this here, and this I was going to do at 14, and this I was going to do at 18. Oops. There we go. So as I did that, it looks like a little bit of the text here flowed in the wrong direction, but I can just shorten this up, maybe like that, and I could pull these up to be a little closer. And you can see the advantage of the fact that it reflows really easily. So let me zoom in a little bit. If I hold down spacebar, I can pan. I'm going to get rid of that top. I don't like that. We'll get rid of that. And so now as I look at this, I can start to make further adjustments. So we'll move on. OK, so these buttons here will allow me to do other options. So let me select my text here. This is superscript. Sorry, I should do it. This would be if I was doing, like let's say I had first. I could take the ST and I can make it superscript, like that. I could underline a particular piece of text. There's an underline option. There's a subscript if I wanted it to go down below. Oops, sorry. I should just select these two. I can make it a subscript so it goes down below. I can make it small capitals. So remember we talked about small caps. I can make it small caps. That would be regular caps. Strike through if I want to strike through. So I've gone through those options. And again, part of today is experimenting and exploring and learning what all these options are and what they do. Then we move on. The next one here is called tracking. So this is the space between, excuse me, it's kerning. It's the space between individual letters. So this is where I'd be fixing a particular font. So this would be an example if I did TY. Oops. Sorry, I have it set as a cap. Where I could take the space between those two letters and I could adjust them forward or backward. See how the spacing changes between the two? Depending on how much I wanted it to. So that's spacing between individual letters. So what I'll do is let me get rid of these two. And I'm going to look at chapter here, and I'm going to look to see if there's any awkward letters. Might need to be a little bit more space there. A little bit more space there. A little bit on the T. A little bit less on the in between these two. Yeah, maybe about like that. So it's subtle adjustments in between letters. Next one down here is our tracking. So we did kerning. We're going to do tracking. This is the overall. Let me do tracking on a paragraph, for example. Let me zoom out. Take this paragraph here, paragraph 1, and I'm going to adjust the tracking. So if I go up, notice that the whole paragraph gets a little bit longer because everything gets spaced out. The letters get spaced out. The space between the words gets spaced out. Obviously, there comes a point where it gets a little bit too spaced out, and it looks too spaced out. But you can see how that spreads it out. I can do the opposite, and I could take this down in the negative direction and make it tighter and more dense, depending on my end purpose. It just makes all of the letters a little bit closer together. So depending on your font, you may find that one or the other of those is appropriate. I'll go back and leave it at 0 for right now. We have the ability to make further adjustments here. This is the height. It will essentially stretch the height of a single letter. So I could take the T here, and I could stretch that height by 200%. It'll make that one letter tall. I don't really recommend doing it, but it's available there as an option. Likewise, I could take a particular letter, and I could raise that letter up or down, however far I wanted to raise it up or down, using this option here, the superscript subscript adjustment. I could also make a letter fat. So if I wanted it to be wider, I could go to 150 or something like that. We can go back to 100. And I can also choose to slant the letter over by a given value. So I could say, let's go 30 degrees, and that would slant the one letter over. Again, better to choose italics from within the font family than to do this yourself. But it is there as an option should you want to do it. OK, so we talked already about color. So I could take a particular piece of text. I could double click on the T, and I could change, and I could make that a particular color. And it would then show up. You guys probably can't tell that that's a color. Let's do pink in honor of my daughter. There we go. We can do that. Okay? So I have that ability as well. As we continue on, those are the more character-related adjustments. We can get into the paragraph adjustments on this half, which essentially is going to do this for the whole paragraph. So first off, we can adjust our justification. So if we wanted it to be centered, for example, we can switch to centered. If we wanted it to be right justified or left justified, we could do that as well. So essentially, which line lines up. We could do so that it lines up on both sides if we wanted it to line up on both sides. This makes it inherently more difficult to read because the words are spaced out in an uneven manner. So it's going to slow down your reading of that particular paragraph. So generally speaking, we leave it as left justified and let one end be ragged. We can choose to indent the whole paragraph. So I could go in by a specific value. I could also choose to indent the first line of the paragraph a little bit more, or I could do it backwards. So if this number is up, I could go back by the same amount and throw it back in the opposite direction. So that is the controlling of the left margin. I can control the right margin as well, and I can control the last line. I have never found a case where I needed to control the last line indent, but technically you can do it. So it's there for you as well. The next option here is the space above a paragraph. So let me move to paragraph 2. And I can choose to have a specific amount of space in between my paragraph. I can also choose to have a specific amount of space after my paragraph. So I could increase the space after. So it's a combination of two different things, space before and space after the two paragraphs. Those two obviously add together to equal the total space between the paragraphs. Now let's say that I wanted the 2 to be a little bit larger and to take up more than one line. I can do that using something called drop caps, which is available here. This is the number of lines that the drop caps is going to take up. So there it is taking up 2 lines. There it is taking up 3 lines, 4 lines, 5 lines. I can also control the number of characters. So right next to it, this is the number of lines. Then we have the number of characters. Right now it's set for 1. If I say 2, it's going to give me the period. Obviously, then it continues on like that. I don't need that many. We'll go back to just 2. and we'll leave it at 5 lines for right now as an example. Okay, so I have those two set. If I wanted to make something numbered, right, let me come down here. If I didn't want to rely on the fact that this is already numbered, I could take this particular paragraph and I could start numbering that paragraph. There it is. It's already by default number 1. I could change the number to start at number 3, for example, if I wanted to, but you guys get the idea. Okay? You can also make it a bullet point by choosing the bullet point button here as we go forward. So all of this is great. Oh, and then I do have hyphenate too, if I wanted to hyphenate the end of the paragraph, which tightens up the ragging just a little bit and still makes it readable. You could do that as well. So let me turn those off. OK, so all of this is great. But if I had to go through, let's say that I wanted to do this drop cap thing, and I had to go through and select every single one of the paragraphs and do the drop cap to each paragraph, that would be a little tedious if I had 100 paragraphs. So what InDesign created is 2 different ways of interacting with text. The first is just on an individual, you can edit the character or you can edit the paragraph on an individual basis. But then they also have something called paragraph styles and character styles. These are repeatable sets of rules that happen to a particular paragraph. So for example, let's look at this paragraph right here. I've already set it up the way that I want it. I'm going to go to paragraph styles right here, and I'm going to click on the new paragraph style right there, that button. And I'll go ahead and give this a name. So we'll say this is a drop cap 2. And once I've created that drop cap 2, I can click on another paragraph, click on drop cap 2, and it's going to copy the exact same settings that are in there. If I wanted to edit the settings, I could double click on drop cap 2, and it will give me the paragraph style options, which will allow me to make adjustments. So for example, I could say I wanted the justification. Let's see here.
How do you get those extra boxes at tools in the right?
Over here, you need to be in the typography workspace. And then they should show up down here. OK, so I can make a few other adjustments. Let's say I wanted my first line indent to be over just a little bit more. Let's say that I wanted it's already set for 2 characters. All that's good. I don't need any of that. I'll go ahead and say OK. It changes for all of the pieces. So that's a paragraph style adjustment. And it's as simple as clicking in the paragraph and saying that's the paragraph style that's applied to it. If you double click on it, it will create the paragraph style options. Now, it's a little bit tricky and it's a little bit confusing because within the paragraph style options, you also have stuff for basic character formats. So I could specify that every one of these drop caps have a particular font assigned to it. So I could also assign a character style. I could say, you know what, I want the font to be Veranda, and OK, then it's going to adjust all of those to have Veranda as well. To me, I like to keep the 2 separate, but I like to at least point out that they exist. Let me come back and change it back to the Times New Roman. There we go, and I'll say OK, and then we're back to that as a setup. Now, let's say that I wanted these first letters to be in a different font. Okay, or excuse me, the number to be in a different font. I come down here to something called character styles, and I can make a character style out of it. And so there's 2 different ways of doing this, and I'll do this the opposite way. You saw when I did the paragraph style, I had the paragraph, I had it set up the way I wanted, and then I created the paragraph style, and it inherited the properties that I had already set up into my style. The opposite would be, let me create the style first. So here we are under character styles, new style. We're going to call this new style drop cap font or something like that, number. And then I'll come over here into basic characters. My font family here, I want it to be, we'll say it's a Bauhaus. That's fine. Are there any advanced character? Maybe I want the character to be a specific color. Let's make it turquoise, etc. So I'll say OK. And now that is a drop cap character style. So I would have to select these to have the drop cap number style. Like that. So now all of those have it. But let's say, you know what, I really don't like my turquoise anymore. The advantage of setting it up this way is I can go back and say, let me go back to my drop cap number character style. And let me say, you know what, under character color, I didn't like that. I really wanted it to be yellow instead. I can say, OK, everything updates to yellow. So once you've assigned these styles, they work independent of where they're placed in the document. You can just make edits to them from then on. So in a typical document, if I had a numbered list, for example, I would have a paragraph style for that numbered list. If I had a special indentation where I wanted something italicized, I'd have a character style for changing to the italicized version. So you have those two different things to play with, the paragraph styles and the character styles as part of what you're doing today. Okay? And again, for this Vitruvius part of it, it doesn't matter what the end result looks like. I don't really care. It's just about learning what options we have available. Sometimes people want to place an image into this, and I like to introduce that as a concept as well. Let's say I want to put an image into this. If I create the frame first, say, anybody ever tried to put an image into Word? It just hates you, doesn't it? Just especially, how about putting two images on one page? No way. It's not even worth it, right? So in InDesign, we create our frame. We go to File and then Place. And I drop in an image. And it would be nice if I could find an image. Remember, right-click, Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally. All right, there it is. I have no idea why this has anything to do with Vitruvius, but whatever. Okay? Now, the text obviously goes behind my image, which isn't what I want. So if I select the text box right there, on the right side here, there's something called Text Wrap. Let's make that active. And I can choose how the text responds to the image. So I want to wrap around my image like this. I'll select that it needs to wrap around the image. Sorry, wrong one. I need to select the image and then say wrap around my image. And notice the text changes and wraps around the image. The nice thing here is if I move my image, the text still will always wrap around it. Even if I move it in between two, it will wrap around it. I also can add padding around the outside of my image. See how this is right on the edge there? I can say, you know what, I'd like there to be a little bit of padding around my image so that no matter how I move it, there's always a little bit of space around it. And so you can place this. So let's say I like it like that. Let's say I want to make it a little bit smaller. Maybe like that. Perfect. Now it's showing me that particular image. Good news is I can come back and I can say, you know what? I want a second one. Let's put another image right there. File, Place. Another image, right-click, Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally. Oops, sorry. Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally. There we go. And once again, I can select that, go to Text Wrap, and say wrap it around my object. Give myself a little bit of padding. And then I can adjust the placement of this object as well independently. So you can see how flexible this is in terms of how you can move things around and where they might belong and where they don't belong, etc. Let's move that down into this lower corner. Not what I wanted. Like that. So we can wrap the text around that particular object. So once I'm done, I am going to save this as a version. Typically, we're going to get into making PDFs from InDesign. For our purposes today, a JPEG is just fine. When I'm done, I'll go to File and then Export. And I'm going to choose JPEG as my type. Remember, once I click Save here, I need to make sure my resolution is set at 300. Otherwise, your image is going to be too small and too blurry. So we'll set it at 300 before you export. So once you finish this particular piece of it, you're also going to do a word art collage. self-portrait sort of thing. If you do a Google search for word art, you will see what I mean. It's these kinds of things. It doesn't have to be in the shape of you. It could be in the shape of anything. But you guys get the idea. It should be about you. It's like a self-portrait, words that describe you, that sort of thing. Okay? And so I want you to work through fonts and get comfortable with those kinds of things. I do mention in here that you can load alternative fonts. I think I'm going to hold off on that for right now. I think I've been talking long enough. I don't think you want me to keep going. But I will point that out. We'll do that a little bit later on in the semester, so it's not like you're not going to get that skill later on. But sometimes the computer doesn't have the font that you want, and there is a way to temporarily load it on these computers as well. Are there any questions? It doesn't have to be in a shape. If you wanted the shape, you'd have to kind of look for the outline of the shape and put it on a layer and then turn it off. Ultimately, just cover it up. Look for a silhouette of the shape, place that into your scene, and then start arranging your text on top of the shape to get it roughly in that shape. You don't want a text box that is that shape because the text a lot of times goes in different directions. And so filling in the text box doesn't really work. You need individual little text boxes to create it. So anyway, I didn't show you examples of these because there's so many online that you can work through. Obviously, I'm not expecting these kinds that are very involved, okay, or something like this. Something simple is just fine. I mean, even something like this is rather simple, but really nicely done. Okay, so just play around. You can do some Google searches. You're more than welcome to look at examples from last class. There should be some set up here as well. If we go into student work, different examples that other people have done. You can see that they're not quite as involved, but they're really nice. Right, something like that. Okay, make sense? All right, I'll turn you loose.